Hello, everyone. My name is Brent Comstock. We're excited to welcome you to today's webinar. We're just going to take just a minute here. I know that the webinar software takes a minute to add some people in that are in the queue, so we'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. I would encourage you, for those of you that are already on and participating from across the country, I would encourage you to take out your cell phones. We'll begin with a survey fairly early to the beginning of the webinar. So for those of you that are just tuning in, you can help us prepare by getting your cell phones ready, because we're going to have you text in some questions to some survey questions that we have. All right, it looks like everyone's been loaded in, so I want to say welcome to everyone that's joining us. I know we'll have some people that will hop on throughout. My name is Brent Comstock, and I am pleased to be the moderator for today's webinar on rural education. If you are on Twitter, active on Twitter, or any other social media outlets, I would encourage you to follow along using the hashtag #RuleIsCool. We'll be tweeting from our company's account, BCom Solutions, throughout the webinar. I would encourage you to follow that along. Rule is Cool is a hashtag that many rural advocates use, so it also gives you an opportunity, if you follow that hashtag, to see some other activities that's taking place in the rural space, including economic development opportunities, broadband, education, healthcare, and so forth. So I'm delighted to have you all here. For those of you that have connected with one of our webinars in the past, you know that we're very type A here. So we provide an agenda. We start on time or as close to on time as possible, and we like to end early. So if you have questions, there's a couple of housekeeping things that I'm going to go through in point one as we do brief introductions to our esteemed panel of education experts. Then I will give a very quick overview of the Rural Impact Hub and what our mission is. For those of you that are new to our webinars, welcome. For those of you that can't seem to get rid of us, we're glad to have you here again. And then the third and fourth sections are really what we're excited about tonight. We're going to talk about the evolution of education in rural communities, and then we'll have this kind of forum and dialogue. So all of the panelists that you see or will see on your computer screens as they speak, they're coming from across the country. We have East Coast and we have Midwest. We have people that have been experts at the state level, at the local level, and at the national level. And then at the end, we always end our webinars with calls to action. So we'll ask you a question again at the end about what you're going to do to take this forward. We hope that this is very much so an interactive webinar. In addition to following along with the hashtag #RuleIsCool, there is a Q&A section and a chat section in your webinar software that you are accessing this through. So I would encourage you throughout the panel tonight to ask questions as they come in. We'll do questions at the end a little bit, but really we want to interject those questions throughout the panel. So if you have them, you can use either the chat to us or the Q&A, either one. Kaylee from our team here at the Rural Impact Hub and BCom Solutions will be monitoring those and getting those to our panelists. So the first thing I want to do is introduce our lineup that we have today. I'm really excited about the people that we have here that are connected to the Rural Impact Hub in one way or another. And very briefly, just to share with you, everyone on the panel today is here for a reason. So if you attended our Rural Economic Development webinar, I hope you thought that was successful and helpful to you. We took the same approach. You'll notice very similar slides, very similar style of content, because we had such great feedback. Maddie represents the Nebraska State Education Association as their executive director and has experience at the national level as well. Dan is the president. Dr. Hanson is the president at Peru State College. Ryan is what we won't say is a recovering school administrator, but is transitioned from school administration into a really exciting new opportunity. And John is joining us from the East Coast and has a plethora of rural education experience, largely being the former U.S. Department of Education Deputy Assistant Secretary for Rural Outreach, which I would love to see your business card when you have that title, John, because I'm sure it was not the normal size business card. And then Kaylee and I will be joining you in the most quiet capacity. For those of you that know me personally, this will be very challenging for me, but I am not going to be the one that talks the most on this, just in the beginning at least. And what we'll do today is we'll have each panelist have an opportunity. We've posed some questions to them. They'll talk a little bit about themselves just so that you can understand their experience, and also so that you can kind of frame your questions for them. You can ask a question to the general group, or you can ask a question to someone more specifically. So each panelist will have about 5 minutes to talk about some questions that we have listed out, and you'll see them on your screens. These are not the only questions that we have to ask. If you add up that time, we'll end that first round of questions right after the half hour, maybe a little bit before. And then it's an opportunity to ask questions from you, or we can go back around with the panelists and do more of a dialogue as well. So before we get started though, I'm all about interactivity on webinars. So you're going to see in just a second here a question, I believe. There we go. So you should see here the question that asks, please describe your interest in rural education. So if you take out your phone and go to MENTI.com, menti.com, and then enter that code at the top, you can fill out who you are here on the webinar today. So go ahead and take a minute to do that. This will give our panelists an opportunity to know who is joining us. So you can do that from your computer, or you can do that from your phone. And we have one person that's participated. So that means that we have at least one person that's listening to what we're talking about tonight. And just fill in who you are. You might be someone from multiple. Pick the one that you're going to, that part of your brain that you're going to hone in on tonight. And we'll wait just about 20 seconds or so. It looks like we've got a couple dozen people here on, so we'll just wait a minute for some people to fill in. You should be able to see those on the screen as well, how your results are being added in. Our panelists, we did a few preview sessions, a few dress rehearsals, if you will, but this is really the opportunity for them to also see who's actually joining this and what did I con them into doing. All right. So we have an overwhelming majority on the educator part. So continue to fill that in, please. We would love to continue to see those results come in. And then I'm going to ask one other question. So our panelists have now seen this. They know who's joining us. The second question of the evening that you should see pop up if you're still on that menti.com, MENTI.com. If not, you can just re-enter the code. Is what you're most interested in learning about. So you can check the box there as to what's most interesting to you, and our panelists will kind of use this to weave into their questions that we're posing to them. I'll give you just a couple of minutes. There's 3 options there, and just give you just a second to complete those. All right, so we're gonna flip back over to, if we get through this entire webinar without a technical glitch, then there's something to be celebrated right then and there. So we're gonna turn it over, just a very brief description about the Rural Impact Hub. For those of you that are joining from Auburn or Southeast Nebraska, you're familiar with this picture. The Rural Impact Hub is BCom Solutions' social impact center. So we believe wholeheartedly that rural communities thrive when people are being innovative, when people are working together, and when people are having difficult, sometimes challenging conversations. So tonight, as we dig into rural education, this is not supposed to be a PowerPoint slide deck. This is instead supposed to be a very thought-provoking conversation. I've told all of our panelists that are on that if they are allowed or want to dive into politics, we are an apolitical organization at the Rural Impact Hub. For those people on here that their jobs require them to not discuss politics, they won't be doing that this evening. but we haven't given any guidelines to the panelists. So it's a real opportunity for you to hear from them. We haven't really given them a guideline beyond just we want to know your expertise in rural education. And at the Rural Impact Hub, we have in-person events every other month, and then every other month we do, on those off months, we do national webinars. So we reach a state audience in Nebraska and then a national audience through our webinar program. What we're going to do now is we're going to turn it over to our panelists. Maddie is our first panelist, and I'm going to leave this up here just long enough for Maddie to talk a little bit about herself, and then I will move right into the questions that Maddie will kind of discuss as she talks about rural education and kind of the role that she fills at the Nebraska State Education Association. Maddie?
Thanks very much, Brent. And I will say that you did give us guidelines, because you told us if we talk more than 5 minutes, you were going to like grab the hook and yank us off.
Oh,
so,
well, content-wise.
Yes, yes. So thanks for being on tonight. Maddie Fennell, I'm an educator, 27 years with the Omaha Public Schools as an elementary teacher. My last 3 years I was spent on loan. I was on loan to the U.S. Department of Education, working on teacher leadership. I worked on a project called Teach to Lead and also helped staff the secretary. I was there after John was. We didn't overlap. When I left that position, I became the executive director of the Nebraska State Education Association. And we are the union for every teacher across the state of Nebraska. We have about an 80% membership density, which is tremendous in a right to work state. We're very proud of that fact. I've been executive director for 2 years now. I also serve as chair of the board of directors of the National Network of State Teachers of the Year. I was the Nebraska Teacher of the Year in 2007, which is part of what really broadened my understanding of rural education at the time. So I serve as the chair of that board. I'm also on the board of the Jefferson Education Exchange, which is working on helping educators and schools spend their technology dollars more wisely, both on hardware and software. And then I also work on the Education Reimagined project, which is trying to come up with what should our education system be to meet the needs of the future. So trying to break out of the current paradigms that we live in to determine what do we need to do differently in our education system to meet the needs of our changing learners. So that's a little bit about me. And my 3 questions that I'm going to answer tonight, first of all, are up on the screen. The first one is, what are the positive impacts of a successful rural school system in small town USA? And quite honestly, what we find is communities revolve around their school, especially in the smaller communities. Nebraska has gone from, when I started teaching in the early 90s, we had over 900 school districts. We now have 244. And we have seen that schools often fight tooth and nail to keep a school, the community will fight tooth and nail to keep the school in their community, because they know quite often when a school closes down, the community closes down. And so a successful rural school system is often the backbone of a small community. You know, it's where everybody goes on Friday night to a football game or a basketball game. It's where everybody chips in and helps redo the track. But it's really with much of the community revolves around the school in a small school system. I have the wonderful opportunity to go out and visit schools across the state. Even though I came from a large urban district, I do get the opportunity to go out and visit all of our schools across the state. And I am so pleased at the high level of education that happens no matter where our students are at. The second question here is, how do rural schools innovate to remain relevant in the future? And I think that that's a real challenge, because rural schools also have a challenge regarding resources. And so what I've seen is rural schools, as I've been out visiting and talked with teachers, they are very resourceful in their use of what they do have. They're very community oriented. People really pull together to get things done. They also think very carefully about how to use the resources that they do have. So for instance, and they also use technology very carefully. You know, there's been quite honestly, there was a real fight at one time with distance education, because many people were very afraid that distance education was going to take the place of a teacher in a school. And I think that many of us have come to understand that no one ever moves to that model unless they really have to. But it's become the lifeblood for some of our schools, because they're not going to be able to offer what they want to and what they need to for their kids if they don't have the opportunity to use that type of innovation. And they have to do that to stay relevant. We've also seen, and there's some argument about this, Nebraska has kind of an open system in regards to enrollment. And so you don't have to go to a school district just based upon your address. And so in our metro areas, for instance, in Omaha, there's 7 high schools in the Omaha Public Schools, so kids transfer between those, but they can also go to any of the other school districts in the metro community area. We also see that in the rural areas. And what we've kind of seen is a bit of a tussle for kids. And so one of the things that they've done to remain relevant is they're actually going and they're pulling kids from other school districts into their school district, and they're kind of becoming a niche district for what they can offer to those schools. So they're finding ways to market themselves to bring students into schools that would otherwise have declining school enrollment. And I think the greatest challenge for rural public schools, I will tell you, in Nebraska, our greatest challenge right now is an over-reliance on property taxes. We are 48th in the nation for state funding of education. And our farmers are really feeling the brunt of that because the predominance of the funding is coming from property taxes. And, you know, people look at farmers and like, wow, you're so rich, you have all this land, but they can only really get the money out of the land if they sell it. And so it's very difficult for them to be paying increasing taxes. And if many of you have read in the last few weeks about the terrible flooding and loss of livestock in our state. And that also creates a real concern. Quite honestly, part of our problem in the last few weeks has been 20-minute commutes to school have become 2-hour commutes to school because so many roads were washed away. And so, you know, I think that the challenges of our rural schools, many of them do focus around resourcing. And I will say that when our rural schools find that they have kids who are in need, it can be a greater burden on a rural school. So if you get a high need student in an urban setting, you often have other high need students, and so you can add that student to a class. But if you get a student who's a high need student in a rural setting, it might be the only child who has that high need, and that might mean that you have to hire an entire person to cover the needs of that student. Or if you have a student with a severe behavior problem, you might not have the resources, the community resources, to go out and get the help for that student. We have a major problem with a lack of mental health resources in our rural areas for our students and for adults who are struggling. And so that creates a problem that we know that those problems don't stop at the classroom door. The needs of the family and the needs of the student come into the classroom. And so our rural schools have a lot to do to meet those needs. But we find that they're very good at reaching out to their communities, at reaching out to other resources to meet those needs, including, we're very proud of the fact that NSEA will often help with resources for many of our kids. For 25 years, we've run our own 501c3 to meet the basic needs of students around the state. And so one of our members just has to call and say, I have a kid who needs glasses or a coat or a bed, or, you know, we've even helped some families who needed some help with some medical deductibles so that they can get what they need. And our educators are very good at reaching out and asking for that help. So I'm probably at my 5 minutes, Brent.
Yes, perfect timing.
Okay.
So one of the things that, and if you have questions for Maddie or want to bring up a question, feel free to type that into the chat. As I mentioned, we're going to roll to the next speaker, but we'll come back around. So if you want to dig into any of those things with Maddie, you certainly can. One of the things that I want to come back to when we come back around is talking about how do you do that competitive piece in rural schools. Without people feeling territorial because they know the people that are right next to them, right? So that's one of the things I want to dig into. But first, I have an opportunity to introduce to you Dr. Hanson, who is the president at Peru State College. For those of you in the Midwest who are probably familiar with Nebraska's historic Peru State College. Dan and I have known each other for quite some time. I won't tell you how old I was when we first met, and he won't either now that I told him that. But I'm excited to have him on to share a little bit about what he's seen in his career, and then also to dig into the questions centered around higher education in rural communities.
Thank you, Brent. Really appreciate being included here. And I did get to know Brent early, and I was going to share. I met him in I think you were high school or maybe even 8th grade. He was a star student.
So last week.
Yeah, a star student, and what I recall is his piano playing was quite exceptional. So I don't know if all of you know that. So anyway, thank you so much, Brent, for including me. It's great to be a part of this. Just a little bit about my background. I've been in the rural parts of the country most of my life. I grew up in Wisconsin and Iowa, and had professional careers in Wisconsin, Iowa, and now Nebraska. And it's a real privilege for me to be a part of Peru State College and its historic tradition. I started my career actually doing admissions work in a small college in north central Iowa, and then went on and got my master's and eventually PhD in computer science and instructional technology. And what I really liked during that time that I was studying is learning how people learn and how people learn best. And so now in this role that I hadn't anticipated, I think a lot about how we position resources to best help people learn. I served quite a bit of my career then as a faculty member at Waldorf College, and I was teaching information systems types of courses and coding and systems analysis. And even that served me well in my role now as president. In all of that, the whole focus for me has been on student success and how do you best position students to learn in this environment. And so I started at Peru State. I guess I'm in my 10th year, and our focus here has been on building on the strengths of this institution and looking to improve the educational opportunities for our students here in Nebraska and in the rural parts of the state. So that's a quick overview. Peru State is Nebraska's first college. It was established, created 2 months after the state of Nebraska was formed in 1867. Started as a normal school, and so we've provided teachers around this region for years. But we've expanded into liberal arts with strong business and psychology, criminal justice, and pre-health kinds of sciences. We're a small college. We have about 1,000 on-campus day students and a head count of about 2,500 because we provide a lot of online courses as well, and we were early in that area. Key to our mission, and important I think to the rural parts of the state, are access and affordability. And so we work hard to provide access at an affordable cost for students. And we have a historic commitment to serving the region. So that's kind of a quick overview of the setting, although maybe I should mention we're in a very small town. Peru is a town of less than 1,000, and so that provides maybe a unique dynamic for us as well. Just a couple quick things about the college right now. There's been some really good things. We've had our alumni and the state of Nebraska invest over $70 million in our small and beautiful campus. And if you're not from Nebraska, you're probably thinking it's all flat, but we're in the hills along the Missouri River. And it's a beautiful small campus. We've had overall strong enrollments, but the strength of any institution is in its faculty and staff. And I'm proud to say we've attracted some really fine people. In a national survey last year, our faculty were ranked above the national average on every category of student satisfaction compared to other institutions, so we're proud of that. And as a result of those engaging opportunities working with faculty, many of our students have had success at the national level. Let me get into some of the questions. So how has the importance of higher education in rural America evolved in the last 10 years? I think we all know that the rural population, even beyond 10 years, has been shifting to the urban areas. And so we play a larger and larger role, and I think the region looks to colleges for leadership. We're the second largest employer in a 5-county area. We have a large impact on the economy, and we're also a resource of education, cultural activities, athletics, and facilities for the region. So we believe we need to be intentional in playing a greater role in strengthening our rural communities. Some of the ways we do that is just through educational resources. We have a lot of the students a lot of the population in the area counties who have attended Peru State either for a course or full degrees. We provide opportunities for high school students and elementary schools to be on campus through things like History Day, business contests, Art Day, Math Day, Show Choir Festival, just a whole variety of things. And I think, Brent, you might have come for the piano extravaganza. And then we also, it's important for us to be serving the state of Nebraska and its workforce needs. And right now, we have a really low unemployment rate of 2.8%. That's similar to some of the surrounding states. And all businesses in the state need good employees, but some of the rural industries are really hurt by this, even more than the urban. And so this last fall, we met with most of the major business and industries throughout our 5-county region. And while they need entry-level positions, and you hear that quite a bit, maybe technical degrees, they have some real concerns about building capacity for the future in terms of their management teams, computer information systems, and accounting. And so we have a real responsibility to help direct students to those areas. And they need people who are willing to live and work in rural parts of the country. Another question that you'll see on there, how can rural colleges and universities capitalize on technology to enhance their mission? The Chronicle of Higher Education had an article this week about education deserts related to higher education. And they talked about, I think 70% of our country is rural, and many of those areas are greater than 60 miles from a place of higher education. And so one of the ways we've used technology to help reach out to people who want to do degree work and can't get to campus, we started online programs early in the early 2000s that have a long tradition of successful online programming. The average age of our students in those programs are 35 to 37. And so for many of them, they're either positioning for a promotion in their place of work, or they're getting back into the workforce after parenting. But it's a really important part of our mission to reach out to those folks, and technology allows that. On campus, our students have come to expect the kind of interface that our online students have on campus, so that the resources that are provided through the Blackboard shell or those kinds of things are available to them as well. And then we also share courses with other colleges in our state college system, and that allows us to increase our offerings for our on-campus students as well. One of the questions talks about what can you do that's distinctive in a smaller college setting, in a rural setting, that can attract students. And I didn't mention this, but we have a unique demographic in that we have a lot of rural students, but we also have a lot of students who are coming from the metropolitan area in Nebraska and in Missouri here as well. And what we've done, we've worked very intentionally on shaping our whole student experience around the concept of engagement, which comes out of research by George Koo that looks at best practices in student learning. And that suggests that the best way to learn is through an active approach in the classroom, an active approach on campus, and we talk about an active approach in Southeast Nebraska and beyond. So we provide funding to faculty members who come up with creative ways to engage students beyond the classroom, things like service learning projects in the region that then also help build the communities in the region. We had a history class that did work for the city of Auburn and did research on their buildings to help prepare to submit an application to become a National Historic District, which they did. We've had a lot of service from our students. One that we're really proud of is they've worked with the Lincoln Food Bank to address food insecurity in our region. We have a lot of food insecurity here, and so we do a student-run food distribution once a month right on our campus that our students volunteer and coordinate. And we help serve over 100 families each month through that food distribution. And so we think that those kinds of things provide really distinctive experiences for our students that you can do in a smaller college setting that would be difficult to do in a larger setting. One other very intentional thing that we've done is partner with the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and we offer rural health opportunities programs for students who want to get into medical fields, and they get a very good discount on tuition and automatic acceptance into UNMC in this program, but they're committed to going back to the rural parts of the state. And we started that a few years ago here at Peru State, and we're starting to see students who will be graduating coming back to their small towns in the area. So, so those are some of the things that we're doing at Peru State. I think if you look across the nation at these rural institutions, that many of them started as normal schools, they're really critical to the success of the regions. Access and affordability matters for those students, and providing something that's distinctive and for us personal and engaging helps bring those students to our campuses. And so rural institutions play a vital role. We take that role seriously, and we're still looking for ways to improve how we do that in this region. There was one other thing I intended to mention. We have, as part of our last strategic plan, we have partnered with the city of Peru, this small town, and we have started a strategic planning effort with the city and have identified 4 key areas: housing, infrastructure, and economic development, and then attraction and retention. And one of the unique things about this is we're bringing our foundation in to help with grant writing, and we have several alumni who are engaged in this with us. Coming back to the small town of Peru, a couple of them have already purchased homes and started to renovate those homes to assist with this effort. So that's something we're doing very intentionally in us.
Great, thanks, Dan. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and just something to think about as we move on to our next panelist is how do all these pieces play together? I know in other settings we've done things, webinars on things like rural broadband and economic development. And I think the interesting thing is on all of these, if each of these pillars is successful or is active and moving, then there's an energy within the community. And I think, just having lived in Nebraska, seeing what's going on at Peru State College is an exciting thing. And I should mention as well, the Rural Impact Hub has several key partners that invest in things like this and our speaker series and other things. And Peru State College was one of the first ones. And so much ado to Dan's leadership and the wonderful people that are there. So we'll turn it over now to Ryan. So Ryan is as I said before, he's a former school administrator, and I'm not going to dig into that because that's not the interesting thing right now anymore. What is interesting is what Ryan's working on now. And when we were forming this webinar, we wanted to make sure that there were things that were more institutional, so higher education, K through 12 systems, but then we wanted to figure out ways that the boundaries can be pushed a little bit. And so Ryan has recently joined an organization that's doing that in the education space. So I'll let him kind of tell briefly about himself and his background, and then dig into the questions that we posed for him relevant to his area of expertise.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate the opportunity to to be a part of this. Just a little background on me. Grew up in a small town southwest of Lincoln, Friend, Nebraska. Farm family. My mom was an educator for a number of years. My younger brother is currently the middle school principal at Waverly, so I was able to work with him as I was principal at the Waverly High School for about 11 years, transitioning in January of this year, which was an interesting dynamic. Very difficult to make a decision to leave someplace that you've been a part of for a long time and hold near and dear to your heart. But the opportunity to be a part of something that Find Your Grind believes in, it was what I could say is a dream job opportunity for me, and would have been foolish to pass up. And just something that I'm very passionate about, and that is just helping kids find their way and increase their ability to have hope and confidence in their future. That's really a summary of what Find Your Grind is about, providing some direction. An analogy we kind of use is we want to provide not only the mirror, which I think a lot of kids can see what they're about, maybe their personality dynamics, their strengths, a lot of things they can do to look in the mirror. But what we don't provide for them is that map. What does that look like for their future? How do they leverage their strengths and leverage their characteristics to be who they want to be and to make an impact in the future? So that was the draw for me to make that commitment, and it's been an exciting 4 months so far. Just a little more background on Find Your Grind, and it's a education foundation is out of Los Angeles, California, but has local ties to the Bay here in Lincoln. And if those of you that are familiar with Mike Smith, he is one of the founding members of Find Your Grind and also the founder of the Bay. And they have just focused on moving into that education space and providing opportunities for kids that might not otherwise have those opportunities. And really, Find Your Grind, we're about changing the conversation and the age-old question that kids have heard forever, that we all were asked the same question, and that is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And to be honest, I think it's a unfair question to ask kids. It puts a lot of pressure on kids. And if we were honest about kids' answers, kids who say they know what they want to be when they grow up, very few really do. They might know what they think they should be, or they might know what their parents want them to be, or they might know because there are 3 or 4 careers that are familiar to them. But deep down, kids really struggle with making those decisions at that age in high school, just because they haven't been prepared. They haven't been asked the right questions prior to that in order to make those solid decisions. And the statistics support that, with the number of kids struggling, changing majors, the amount of college debt that kids are starting to collect. But everywhere we go, we ask a group we're speaking to how many of them know a college-age student living in the basement with their parents. And it's can be kind of a joke, but it is, unfortunately, there's more and more kids that they have a college degree, but really aren't able to either find a job or are not able to find something that they enjoy. And that's becoming more and more of a problem. So trying to focus on kids knowing their north, it's a term that we use. Focus on who you want to be rather than what you want to be. Changing that conversation and focus on discovery, self-awareness. What are your interests? Do all those things first, and then begin to identify, okay, what careers really fit with who I am and who I want to be, rather than the old traditional way of, I'm going to pick a career and just hope that it works out, hope that it's something that I like. So many kids might say they want to be in the medical field, and you hear stories, whether it be the first chemistry test they take and they change their major, which that happened to me, or first time they're in a lab and they see blood or see any sort of medical equipment, and they get queasy and decide, you know what, maybe this just isn't for me. Well, again, going back to what are kids putting into making those decisions, and how are those decisions being, what are the conversations around those decisions? Kids need more and more support to make sure those things align in order for them to have confidence moving forward. And a couple of the questions that I want to be able to help answer, just how might the Find Your Grind be a partner to provide value to rural education? And to me, the value of what rural America provides, and especially in Nebraska, helping kids understand that there are so many great opportunities to stay in a rural area, or even if you're from a bigger city, the opportunities that they could pursue in the rural area, but making sure those decisions are made because that's the right fit for them. And I think so many kids just have the grass is greener mentality. They aren't aware of what they have right in front of them, the values and the opportunities, the relationships that come with small town America. But if kids are more focused on the type of lifestyle they want to live and the things they're most comfortable with, and then all of a sudden being able to realize that, hey, there are a lot of those things that I can accomplish by staying right where I am, or trying to access the opportunities of a smaller community that maybe they haven't in the past. You see places like Tulsa, Oklahoma offering, $10,000 scholarships for people to move to Tulsa and to work, whether it's remote or they just want people connecting with. They're trying to build their dynamic and build their opportunities through incentives, because they're having such a difficult time getting people to commit to the smaller areas or the more remote areas in the United States, which that would include a lot of those rural areas that we've talked about here in Nebraska. How does Find Your Grind measure success versus a more traditional approach? And really just, you know, this has been something that the question that I've asked a lot as a school administrator is, can we all agree on what success is for kids? And I think everybody knows what success should be. Unfortunately, what has the headlines and what drives a lot of the decision is the numbers on tests and accountability and how we compare, which those things are definitely important, but they can't be the only measure. And for us at Find Your Grind, really measurement comes down to, are we able to see more and more students that are leaving high school confident and able to articulate their decision-making process, why they're choosing to do what they want to do, what has their journey been made up of that has led them to that decision. Just being able to talk about those things and to reflect on, you know, here's who I am, and these are the things that I want to be able to do, and here's where those opportunities exist. That to me is success. How do you quantify that? That's very difficult, but I think it's something that we can start focusing on, whether it's in schools or different opportunities, to where that stuff does matter, and that we can promote those responses, and we can have kids stand up in front of peers, in front of adults and community members, and be able to explain, here's why I'm ready for the next phase of my life, and here's why I'm going to be successful, and here's what I'm about, and here's where I'm going to go to achieve what I want to achieve. I think that will be very difficult for a majority of kids to do in that traditional setting where success is measured by you know, your GPA, or maybe it's measured by your success on the field or the court. And those things are great experiences, but again, they can't be the only thing. And the ability for kids to articulate to others and communicate why they're hopeful, why they're confident, I think would be a very, very powerful resource, and something that would allow us to go back to the purpose of what education is, and allow us to connect those dots and be able to focus on the things that truly matter down the road. So that's a little bit about kind of what we're about at Find Your Grind, and being a startup type education organization. We're learning along the way. I've been able to bring my experiences in education to this startup and to this model. Things move a little bit quicker in this realm versus public education, which sometimes that can be good and sometimes that can be not so good. So I'm learning those tricks along the way as well. But so far, it's been a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to more conversations like this about how we can benefit education.
Great. Thank you. So just a quick reminder for those of you that are on, if you have questions or would like one of our panelists to dig into something more, we have one more panelist that will be talking next. But if you have questions, or again, want them to elaborate on something, if there was something that they mentioned that you want them to go back to, this is a great opportunity to do that, because as we kind of wind down, I know we're a little bit short on time. So I'm going to turn it over to John, and John has a lot of experience in a lot of different realms, and kind of in the way that we got connected was in the rural space, of course, and John had served in the Obama administration in the Department of Education. So I think there's a lot to be said about you know, what is rural education's priority and importance in, say, an administration, both at the state level, at the local level, and at the national level. I think everyone on this panel can talk, probably not on here, but in some setting or another, about how to interact with government in a way that supports the ultimate objective of what we're trying to do. So I'm going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit more about his background, and then dive into some of the questions on the national scale that we've asked him to kind of dig into.
So thank you, Brent. It's a privilege to join you. You brought up a good point about the differences in schools and communities from place to place. Rural communities are very different from place to place. And I started out my career as a journalist, a newspaper reporter, moved into communications, government, and education. And then I had the privilege to serve in the Obama administration under United States Secretary of Education Arne Duncan for 4.5 years, and really begin to learn about the differences in education around the country. Traveled to 42 states in 4.5 years. Got to visit rural schools, rural colleges, talk to students, parents, teachers, families, and see those differences, which are very stark, not just between urban, suburban, and rural, but rural is different from place to place, and it means something different to people depending on where they live in the country. And I can tell you that whether it's in the Northeast where, you know, the paper mills used to be the dominant industry, but they've run their life cycle, and you see more poverty as you move away from cities up in the Northeast into the mountains. Also in Appalachia, where poverty looks very different as well. And you're talking about remote rural areas where the mountain and the terrain are a barrier to resources and opportunity. In the Midwest, Nebraska, Wyoming, it's just the vast distance between resources that can really become a barrier as well. And then down through the Pacific West and Southwest, again, you're talking about terrain, distance, access to resources. So when we talk about rural, it's very different depending on where you are. The context is different for rural students and schools. You could be talking about a state like South Dakota with Native American reservations as well. You could talk about communities where schools might have internet. It may be a good connection, it may be not. And when students go home, they may not have any internet at all. So the challenges are very different in rural areas from urban and suburban, and they're also different depending on where you are in a rural community and where you live in the United States. I can also tell you that when I was traveling around the country and trying to listen and learn, but also explain policy and programs that were being implemented, it was important to listen to school leaders about what that would look like on the ground. Because when you talk about a school district and the structure of a school district, it's also different. When I was first asked by Secretary Duncan to organize a meeting rural superintendents at the Department of Education in DC, we brought people in from around the country, and you should have seen the looks on different policy folks' faces when they learned about superintendents who were also principals, who also were asked to drive the school bus sometimes, and they periodically covered for the janitor. And so they wear many hats. So you're talking about teachers and administrators that wear multiple hats. They may not have the same resources or access to partners that schools have in cities and suburbs. We even had a superintendent from Raisin City, California, who I remember very vividly explaining that she was the superintendent of a single K-8 school district. So a single school that was a district. She was the superintendent, principal, and pretty much responsible for making sure all of those students were well educated, even though you're talking about one school. So it does look very different from place to place. And we have to think about that when we start trying to adapt policy to schools that are very different around the country. And one of the things that was a step forward the last time the education law, the federal education law, was reauthorized, I think, was giving more flexibility and ability to the states to determine what's best for their schools. And so now the responsibility lies on states, and many states are stepping up. So for example, if rural schools really want to use education to be a lever for opportunity and economic redevelopment, there are some good examples of that happening, and it happens with state support. So I'll give you two. There are two school districts I'm working with. One is a school district on the eastern shore of Maryland, Queen Anne's County. You have to cross the Chesapeake Bay Bridge to get to the eastern shore. Queen Anne's County is very agricultural. you would have to go back over that bridge to get to a university, or you could go 3 hours or more south to get to a university, but they have a community college nearby. Many rural areas rely on their community college. It can be an economic development tool. It certainly can be the closest access to higher education for students, and it can be a partner for schools. And I'll tell you that schools are thinking about, how do we connect education to existing careers, but also new opportunities and new careers in their small towns, to reinvent them or sustain them. In Queen Anne's County, they were fortunate that the state of Maryland just approved them to be able to offer youth apprenticeships. So now they can partner with businesses in their community to offer youth apprenticeships to their students, who can then get paid apprenticeships in the summertime in a career and technical field, and possibly move into an adult apprenticeship after high school. They could go straight to work, or they could go to college. So they're leveraging their community college, their businesses, and working together to create new economic opportunities and career paths for their students. Now, it looks very different. Again, another education organization I work with in Kentucky, the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. They support 23 small rural school districts in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. Very isolated and remote, have no university or college in their 23 district footprint. They do have technical and community colleges nearby, and where they have business activity, they're trying to think creatively about whether they can partner or start something new. So the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, for example, realized that in Kentucky, many people might not realize that aerospace is one of the top industries in the state of Kentucky. So they started teaching their students to design, build, and become certified to fly drones. They worked with their community and technical college to write a new curriculum, to create a new career path for those students from K-12 to the community college or technical college, and then giving them the opportunity to see new economic opportunities around them. The coal industry has pretty much run its life cycle, but think about all the industries that use drones: real estate, photography, search and rescue, even Amazon these days. So they're trying to think creatively about, how can we leverage education to create something new? I'll also tell you, just as a last example, I'm sure many of you have seen on HGTV the tiny homes, tiny house craze. Well, in Kentucky, they thought about, how do we teach kids how to build homes, but we have to do it in a way that will fit the terrain, will have to meet the local needs, and is affordable, because you're talking about a high poverty region that's having a housing crisis, the crisis of livable housing in that area. So they're teaching kids to build tiny homes. So you can imagine how exciting that is for them to see tiny homes on TV, to be taught to build tiny homes, to learn math in that hands-on form. I've even seen the kids thinking about, well, maybe I could go into business for myself after high school, building these tiny homes, helping people in the community who need a suitable place to live, or even selling them. They've sold them online to people from coast to coast. People from California came to Hazard, Kentucky to purchase a tiny home. People from Maryland came into Hazard, Kentucky to purchase a tiny home. That gives students hope also, that they can create something new in their community through what they're learning at school. So rural communities have always innovated out of necessity. And it's a way to use education as a leverage for change in their community, and to partner with their local businesses as well, to begin to create new opportunities, to begin to show students and children and families that they can stay and they can become the next generation who sustains their community. And I want to just point out one last thing. When I was at the U.S. Department of Education, many rural communities felt like they didn't have any natural partners, or at least they didn't know where to look for resources. And I can tell you, that the United States Department of Agriculture in particular is a place to look. They have field offices in 46 states. They have grant programs, loan programs for everything from distance learning and telemedicine technology. They build homes, they renovate and build schools. They obviously help with nutrition. The Department of Agriculture is a place to look in nearly every state in America for a partner to work on workforce development as well. So I would encourage any school to find out who their USDA state director is, and at least go and talk to them about what their needs are and see what resources they might have that would fit their needs.
Great. Thank you, John. So I'm going to skip over this because I've already filled my time at the beginning. I'm going to end. So just one last opportunity for questions. We had a couple people that submitted questions. To our panelists, if you would like to add something, just because we are short on time, hop in here and wave or do something that grabs my attention. We share this at the end of every webinar, and every Rural Impact Hub event that we have, and it's the numbers are less relevant, and the graph is really not particularly relevant. It's just a statistical example of when we go and speak in different places, a lot of times the perception going in that people invite us into communities to speak with them is centered around this idea that, oh, there are so many people that are leaving. They're looking for success. They're looking for all these different things. And what's interesting is that these two smallest results. So we ask young people this question, and we ask not young people this question about what they think. And we say, young people, when you grow up, you want to what? And there are 5 options here: be rich, change the world, have a family, stay in my hometown, or move far away. And if you ask the parents of these kids to pick what they would select, they pick move far away, they pick change the world, be rich, have a family, and then stay in my hometown as always the last one. When you ask the young people the question, though, and we've done this, the numbers again are more average numbers. So last year we asked, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 young people this question, and on every single individual ask, they never selected staying in their hometown or moving far away as their priority. And the reason we share this is because as we're thinking about education in rural communities, it's not the zip code that matters to these young people. It's oftentimes that people that are practitioners in this space, we use the zip code as more of an excuse. But young people around the country, particularly in the Midwest, when they're asked a question about what they want to do when they grow up, it's be rich, change the world, and have a family. And those go back and forth in different ways, depending on how old the people are, young people are that you ask. But it never has to do with staying in their hometown or moving far away, because they see the opportunity that's presented right in front of them. And then they're expecting to embrace that in one way or another. And I think that's really powerful, and the reason that the Rural Impact Hub is so excited about the development work that we do in rural communities, because we can make that community really as great or as average or as poor as we want it to be. And all of the people that have been on tonight's panel are people that support that specifically in the education space. I'm also skipping our last survey question, just to leave you with an opportunity for our panelists to say any last words or any questions that you might have. Anyone have anything? Maddie, Ryan, Dan, or John? Excellent. Wow. Well, they went over. I will tell you, I was keeping track of a few people's time, and I was like, man, I feel like I'm in college. So I just had to say that in the end. So a few just quick wrap-ups. Number one, if this is your first time joining us, please go to our website, ruralimpacthub.com, and just drop your name and that you were here. We're not going to send you a bunch of spammy emails. We are collecting, well, we will send you a few, but we are collecting people's zip codes to understand where are people in rural communities innovating in a lot of different ways. And so just at the bottom of the website, there's a form that says name, organization, and location. Just tell us where you're from. And we're building a map that's identifying where are rural innovators, so that you can see where those people are, and maybe there's someone close to you that you didn't recognize.
recognize was there. And finally, I have a couple of questions that were emailed in, and I have a couple, there's 2 questions in the comments section that came in, and we've thankfully weaved them into the answers. I would say that the biggest thing is figuring out ways to connect with other people in your community. And the survey question that we skipped was, how will you take action going forward? So this is our call to action to you. All of these people on the panel, I'm sure, would be happy to provide resources that they discussed or mentioned, so that you don't have to write down 6 different email addresses. If you have questions or would like to be connected with one of our panelists, please reach out to Kaylee on our team, and that's just at kaylee@bcomonline.com, and she would be happy to share that with you. Please join us for one of our upcoming events. We've got an Entrepreneurship Academy coming in the summer and early fall for both young adults and adults. And we have a couple of other programs coming up. So tune into our Rural Impact Hub website for upcoming events. And thank you very much to our panelists who have prepared and done a lot of work on this. And right on the dot, 7 o'clock, it just turned 7:01, so that doesn't count. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brent.